But welcome if you're just joining us this is our Ask a Collector series. We also have done an Ask a Curator, and it's kind of a little bit of both today. We are both team members at the History Center. My name's Rachel Warner, and I'm the Director of Collections here. And this is Christine Cooper. She's our Manager of Public Programs. And we've been doing this series just as a way to kind of give you a little bit of a behind the scenes look and also to connect with you and answer some questions. If you have any questions during the presentation, you can put them in the Zoom chat box. We do have that up, and we also have the Facebook chat box open as well. So we'll take a look at that. We might not be able to read them as we're doing the presentation, but at the end, we'll definitely look at those. So the other thing I'd like to say is we do have another one of these planned in November. It's November 19th, and it would be at 12 p.m. again, and it's another Ask a Collector. And we're going to talk a little bit about manuscripts and Proctor and more paper-based items in that one. But today our focus is textiles. We're going to talk a little bit about clothing, a lot about clothing really, and then also some quilts, samplers, other pieces that you might have in your personal collection. So I'm going to let Christine tell you a little bit about herself. And my first question for her, because she's not just a team member here at the History Center, she also is a clothing collector. So I want to ask you what sparked your interest in collecting?
My mom would always tell me that I was an old soul, and I really liked, even when I was little, I would watch old movies like from the 40s, 30s through the 50s. There was like a period of time for like 3 months when I would watch White Christmas every day. And so as I got into high school and learned more about sort of like the swing movement and all of those like cultural things, well, a lot of the cultural aspects of the 40s and 50s, I became interested in the clothing as well. When my mom then downsized and moved into an apartment from our family home, she gave me my great-grandmother's wedding dress from 1904, her prom dress from 56, I think, and another like a bridesmaid dress from around that same time. And so that kind of began my collection. The first piece I ever bought on my own was a late 40s dress that I bought to wear because I love vintage fashion. So that's the beginning of my collecting.
Do you have a favorite piece of those ones, or are you within your own collection?
In my own collection, I buy, when I buy things, I tend to buy things that have a little bit of a problem. Because then if I wear them, I don't feel bad. Like, it's not a museum piece, it's not anything spectacular. So if my wearing of it is not good for it, then nobody's gonna miss it. But my favorite dress that I wear is a blue 1940s piece that was home sewn. And I'm actually, I've taken my grandmother's wedding dress out of the box that I keep it in, and I've been kind of looking at the construction methods recently, as opposed to like the style, but how it was put together. And so it's becoming one of my favorite pieces too. Not just a sentimental piece, but as a costume piece.
Yeah, cool. I get the question a lot as a collections person too. Do you collect? And I collect some things, but of course, like we don't collect York County things. We collect things from out of the region, and you always have to give the first, opportunity to the museum with your own collecting. But I like unfinished projects. I don't know why, but I just love when I find like a quilt top that hasn't been finished, or a sampler, something like that. Like, I have this thing of, I like finishing other people's projects. So that's kind of my collection when it comes to textiles. And I really like getting pieces too that I can kind of play with them and, practice some things like different cleaning techniques and things with them where, you know, I wouldn't do that with pieces in the History Center's collection, but I can kind of play around with my own collection pieces. So, do you want to talk about the brown dress yet?
I do want to talk about the brown dress.
Okay.
So, I have a few art. I mean, as you can see, and this is probably what, like a quarter of the.
Yeah, what you could see right now is about a quarter of the History Centered collection. We might be able to give you a small little view over here and up. But we have 3 rows with double-decker racks and then lots and lots of boxes and drawers. Which, yeah, I don't know if I did say that earlier, but we are in the History Center's clothing storage room. So this is our clothing collection. I think we have over 10,000 pieces total, so it's pretty large collection.
Yeah, so within this collection, I've not seen every piece and not even close. But 2 of my favorite pieces of the History Center's collection are behind us. 1790s men's jacket, which is just really beautiful and in really good condition with these metal buttons, which maybe we'll bring you closer a little bit later so you can see it. But my other favorite piece is this brown dress in the back, which I kind of call the penny dress because it's the same color as a penny. And bring it. Yeah, sure. So this is a late 1790s style, and she has a lot of issues. There are some seams that are kind of worn away. Well, not worn away, but in the drawstring, some of the silk is worn. And she's got a lot of stains. And this is not necessarily something, and Rachel, you can probably speak more to this, that we might put on display as part of an exhibit, just because of like pretty extensive staining that she has on the back.
Sometimes we do things where if we know that the backside won't be seen, we'll still put it out, or we'll put it at an angle to kind of minimize or hide those sort of things. But we do always worry about also the strength of the piece, or this one's in pretty good shape that way.
She's pretty tough. But one of the things that I really love about this is, well, it's a beautiful design. It's got these like really long kind of full sleeves for somebody who is very petite. And so it's an interesting style from the period, but it also has some evidence that it was something else. So this is probably an older piece of taffeta, older than the late 1790s, that was refashioned because materials were very expensive and labor was actually cheaper than materials. So you could take this to a dressmaker or whatever it was looked like before and have it updated so that you were more in style. Some of those, and you won't be able to see them at home, but some of them are some like stitch lines, you know, where they kind of shouldn't be. And on the sleeve folds where there used to be pleats. So there's lots of evidence that this was restyled. We have to travel together because we're tethered.
Yeah. We have a mic system that we're trying out today because we're really trying to get to have better sound for our videos. And do you want to bring the piece you brought? Or sure, I can hold that. Yeah. I want to talk about this a little bit.
Sure. So this being one of my favorite pieces, and it's pretty simple in its construction. While we were home in the fall due to the COVID-19 outbreak, I did a series of videos where I recreated the penny dress, and this is the result. And I have to say it's pretty close to the original. The taffeta that I used is heavier than on the original, but I kind of went for more of a color match rather than a weight match. So yeah, that was a really fun project. And actually, if you're interested in learning more about the original dress or the process that I used to recreate this one, those videos are on our YouTube channel. So
yeah, they're really great if you love sewing or if you just like learning, you know, about historic garments. Christine did an amazing job of recreating this piece. And you can see they're very, very close to each other. So it's really neat to see it. We both kind of joked we wished it was big enough so we could try it on, so we could wear it. But it's beautiful, and she did so much hand stitching on it as well. And this sort of thing is really nice to have, and really to be able to share with people, because we do keep things, we call them education collection pieces. A lot of times they are historic pieces that we end up deaccessioning, which means taking it out of the regular collection, but sometimes we'll retain them to use for education purposes. And this isn't that scenario, but Christine made this one from new fabric, but it's a great piece for us to have now, to be able to show to people, and they can handle it. They can touch it and feel the fabric. They can look at the stitching and the construction, much more so than we could do with the actual piece, because you really have to be careful with these older pieces when you handle them, because sometimes you just can't anticipate where they might have weak spots. And that's also, I can kind of segue into talking about storage, because this is a non-museum hanger, so
do not use wire hangers.
Yeah, which is okay to show you, and it was kind of the reason why we left it there. When we, I'll talk to you a little bit about some care of textiles. If you have pieces in your own collection, or heirloom pieces, and they're on a hanger like this, a lot of times they'll come on one like this from like the dry cleaner or something, which we can talk about dry cleaning later. But you really should remove it from something like this, especially bare wire hangers. You can have issues with rust. But also, there's always different levels of care when it comes to your pieces and your garments. And hanging is kind of the lowest level of care for them. A lot of garments can take being hung, especially if they're newer pieces, but you really have to watch them, because the force of gravity, no matter what, is always going to pull on this piece, and eventually the shoulders will start to stretch out. And we all probably have had that happen to clothes in our own closets, where you find something you haven't worn for years and you see how it's stretched over the hanger. So I
have a dress in my collection. It's one of those pieces that I bought because it was kind of a disaster, and I bought it for $5. It was either late 50s or late 40s or early 50s, and it's just a simple day dress. But whoever had hung it in their closet had left the belt hooked in one loop, and over time the whole dress went like this, so this whole bodice piece stretched out. When you have something on a hanger, the weight of the garment is all right here. So so if you have something like a 1920s dress that's chiffon, that can be a problem, especially if the fabric on the top is heavier. It's two different materials, and the fabric on the skirt is heavier than what's supporting it on top. It can become a big problem for your piece.
A lot of times too, with 20s pieces, there's a lot of heavy beading. It's a time period that has the most issues, because they use the finest fabrics and the heaviest embellishments. So it's very common. We have a lot of them boxed here, because they're, you got this heavy beading, but it's on this really, thin material, and eventually that weight will pull it apart. This piece, it's on a very heavily padded hanger, and we make these here at the History Center. You can make them yourself very easily at home. What you would need is some batting, some like quilt batting, and some unbleached muslin. And you want to make sure you wash it with something that's like a free and clear detergent, so it doesn't have any extra fragrances or things in it. Wash the muslin, and then you can make a cover. Basically, you wrap the batting around it and then make a cover for your hangers, because you really want to pad it out. The other thing it does is you create more surface area. So then that pressure is it's diffused over a bigger area. So instead of like a wire hanger where all that pressure is coming on this one little tiny skinny point, you're kind of spreading it out.
And this lady,
So.
she's pretty hardy. So she's got a silk taffeta that's very tightly woven, and it's lined in a pretty nice linen. So there's a lot of support for that garment, and the skirt is unlined, so it's
lighter
in the bottom.
Yeah.
Not many of us can say that.
Yeah. So hangers are kind of your first option, your first level of caring for a clothing piece. Because we have such a huge collection here at the History Center, we do have a lot of things on hangers, on padded hangers. You can also see how we cover the racks with muslin to keep dust. One thing people don't realize is that dust actually has sharp edges to it on a microscopic level. So it can actually cause damage to the fibers of the fabric over time. So you really do want to protect your pieces from dust as much as possible. We hang a lot, but then when we have a piece that's got issues, like we talked about the 20s ones, or maybe doesn't have issues yet and we want to prevent that, we'll put it in a box. So we actually did have this green suit in a box because it's got some strength issues with its fabric. When we took it out, we put it on a mannequin instead of a hanger because that extra bulk kind of spreads it out, so that that tension is spread out, and it's a lot easier on the piece. The box it was in, when you do kind of moving to boxing things, then you want to make sure that you're always using, number one is acid-free materials. So you can buy acid-free tissue paper a lot easier than you used to be able to. If you go to companies online, like Gaylord is a museum company, and we've talked about them in other presentations, but they started making a lot of preservation kits for home. They call it like family preservation, home archivists, those sort of things. But it's great because you used to have to buy 1,000-foot roll of acid-free tissue, which wasn't really feasible for people at home. And they just couldn't get a hold of acid-free tissue paper. Now Gaylord's a great source. I used to direct people to a company called Foster Stevens, and they were before Gaylord started carrying these things. Foster Stevens had kits where they'd send you a acid-free preservation box. They'd have gloves in it like the ones we're wearing. They'd have, like 20 sheets of acid-free tissue paper, and they'd even have a muslin wrap so that you could also kind of encase the whole thing in muslin. So if you were going to box something, like say you're going to box this green piece, when we took it out, what we did to it was we put some padding down in through the sleeves. We put some tissue. We had tissue in the shoulders to help so that they don't get crushed down. And we call it just padding out, like padding out all the folds too. Because what will happen is anywhere there's a really harsh fold, and this goes for any textile type, quilts are the same way. If there's a really harsh fold, you need to put something in there to help soften it, because that fold almost becomes like a cut line if it's folded for a really, really long time. But yeah, you pad everything out, you fold it the fewest times possible. So it can be really hard to find, a giant box or a box long enough to fit something like this. That's probably, 4.5, 5 feet in length. So a lot of times they do have to be folded maybe once, but where that fold is, you really pad it out with tissue. You could use muslin as well. Muslin's also excellent for lining drawers or boxes. Other, maybe non-acid free boxes that you have, because you really want to make that barrier. A lot of people keep things in a cedar chest, which I don't want to burst your bubble, but cedar itself, you have to, over time that nice smell to us starts to wear away. So it's not necessarily protecting your pieces from pests. But they still can be used. Like you still can use a cedar chest. Definitely put some lining in there of muslin, a couple layers around things if you're keeping like quilts or clothing in there. I've also heard of people using even tin foil around the edge because that's really a good, like a nice kind of barrier between the wood and whatever the objects are inside. And those are kind of like budget things you can do. There's always a different standard between inexpensive things you can do at home, and then if you want to go really crazy and get really expensive boxes, you can do that too, and they're a lot more accessible than they used to be.
The other piece that's really cool is Sterilite. So those clear plastic totes that you can get at Walmart, a lot of times you can use those to store items in. I think they have about like a 10-year kind of life to them.
Yeah.
But very inexpensive as opposed to the archival boxes that you see behind us.
Yeah, some of our archival boxes, a single box can run close to $50. So especially if you want to get these kind of like specialty sizes or really large size boxes, they're better than they used to be. They used to be even more than that. So, but something like a Sterilite box, like a clear plastic box, and what you want to look for those is, the recycling symbol you'll find on things. Always look for ones that say PP, polypropylene, because that's a very clean, inert plastic. And yeah, they're great to use. They're really affordable. Get one for $10. Buy some unbleached muslin, give it a nice wash to get out there's like sizers and things in new fabrics and finishing treatments. Wash that out, and then you can wrap your piece in that. So
yeah, so there's lots of different levels, and I guess the gist is do something. If you can't buy the big expensive museum archival boxes, you can wrap your pieces in muslin or acid-free tissue. But if you want your heirlooms to last, do something. Do whatever is in your power to do.
I always I like this example of, would you do it to your grandma? So, and it's when you think about a piece, and it's like, would you treat your grandma this way? And I think about like the quilt example is, would you put grandma in a chair and sit her by the sunniest window in your house and leave her there for 30 years? Because people unfortunately do that a lot. They don't, not maliciously, they don't realize it's happening. But if you do that to a quilt, and I'm sure a lot of people have had it happen to pieces that they've had, you get it too close to the sun, and then you lift the quilt up and the top is completely different color than the underside. It's sun damaged, which I won't spend too much time on that, but there are things that, you always want to think about: heat, humidity, light, all these things. We call them the agents of decay and change, and they basically, what they're doing is speeding up a chemical reaction. And what we always are trying to do is put the pause button on change, especially in museum collections. We're kind of trying to like freeze things at the time that we get them and really minimize that change over time. So we don't necessarily freeze them, but we do keep, like, this room stays pretty cool. And, when we're in here, if you're in here a long time, you need a sweatshirt, but that's actually really good for the object. So, and then kind of circling back to the grandma example, anything, would you put grandma in the basement where, things get damp? Like, no, you wouldn't treat her like that. So you want to take good care of her, make sure you're protecting her from these different things that could maybe do damage. So. Yeah, sure. I'll talk a little bit about, I have another example here with, we talked about hanging and boxing. And this is an education piece from the collection. But the next kind of step when you kind of think about levels too, is to roll things, roll your textiles. This really helps to.
This would be for flat textiles.
Yeah.
Not for clothing.
Yeah, good. Thank you for saying that. Yeah, this would be for things like quilts, different coverlets, anything, even samplers, anything that's flat like that. The issue is a lot of people don't have space to store the rolls. You know, if you think about how big a quilt is, and then when you roll it onto a tube and have the tissue and muslin around it, it becomes pretty good size. We have specialized racks that we keep all of our quilts that are here at the History Center are all rolled. And what it does is, you know, you're preventing folds. So when you roll something, you know, that tension's kind of diffused over the roll, so you never have a hard crease. And it really is the best way if you can do it. Most people just don't have the space in their home collections. But even if, you know, like this was a small piece of, it's an education piece. It was cut from you know, an older quilt that was in our collection. And it was just kept so that we could use it for pieces. It's got some really nice old fabrics, but for demonstration. But even if you don't have a tube, you know, you can kind of make a roll with tissue paper, with acid-free tissue paper, but just avoid having those creases. Same with, so say you can't roll it and you want to keep it in your hope chest or something, just make sure when you know, make that fold, you put some tissue in that fold. And try to do the fewest folds possible, because you're also going to minimize then the weight and the pressure on that particular spot. So I don't know.
Yeah, and if you are lucky enough that you have space that you can roll it, pool noodle will work.
Oh yeah, thank you. That's it. Yeah, that's an excellent other tip. Is pool noodles are actually, so like the things you put in the pool that float and have the hole in the middle even too, which is good if you want to can put like some sort of rod through that to help, you know, store it somewhere. If you take a pool noodle and you cover it with acid-free tissue paper, you basically have made a really nice lightweight tube for yourself, and those you can get anywhere. What they're made out of is polypropylene, which is an inert plastic. And the coloring you don't need to worry about, because that process is, it's it's part of like the structure of the molecule. The color is not going to come out of that on it. It's still safe to use them, because I know they do come in funky colors. So.
But use a new one.
Yes. Yeah.
Don't like go grab one out of the pool.
Yeah, definitely not, because it might have chlorine and things on it too. The other piece I'll just show really quickly. This is another education collection quilt, but we get questions a lot about like, how do I, you know, a lot of people do want to show off the things that they have, and you can do that for small amounts of time. This one's a good example. This is a quilt that's had a sleeve. You can see if this issue was it had a really bad stain on it, and some water damage came to us. But this quilt had a sleeve put onto it. And that's another way that you can, you know, maybe have it out for a short amount of time, but you are diffusing the weight of the quilt. Then once you have the sleeve, then the weight of it is distributed across the whole top. So it really helps to keep it from stretching. You really have to be careful though with hanging things, especially historic pieces, because over time they will stretch, or it'll pull on the top of it. We have a lot of quilts in the collection that can be hung, but then we have a lot that are just too old or too heavy to withstand that. So. Do you want to talk about our don't throw away.
Okay, this
Yeah.
one, so I've already told you kind of about my affinity for collecting things that have issues. Um, don't throw it away. If you find an heirloom and, oh, it has water damage, or a seam has split, or the silk is starting to shatter, don't throw it away. There is somebody that will want it. Um, Things can be used for study. I know a lot of people that get excited when they find 18th and 19th century foundation garments that have areas where the fabric is worn away, because then you can see the layers that are in there and you can find out what it's made of. So they're really good study pieces. We can learn a lot from clothing and textiles when they're not in great condition. Might not be things that maybe a museum would want. Maybe we would, maybe we wouldn't. But there are students that will use them.
Yeah.
There are schools that will use them as study pieces, and like Rachel says, she practices techniques on them. And we can also learn a lot about everyday people through their clothing. So maybe it's something that you don't think is very special, an old apron or work clothes or something like that, but there's a lot that can be learned. This gentleman is a museum quality piece, but we were looking at him the other day and we noticed that there's slightly more wear on his left sleeve than on his right. And so we can kind of infer that whoever this gentleman was, that he was probably left-handed, which, I don't know, that's the kind of thing that makes me excited when there's a story.
Yeah.
So we can learn a lot about the item, its construction, its materials used in the construction, and even the people that wore it, for pieces that are not in great condition.
Yeah. And there's something to be said for, we want, a big thing for us is we want representation of all the people that lived in New York, and all different socioeconomic levels too. And the thing with like especially historic clothing, is that actually in the record of, and this is kind of across the globe really, we don't have a lot of examples of what an everyday person, or especially a poor person, would have worn. So, we in the museum collections, and that goes for what's here too, we tend to have pieces that were the wealthiest people and in the community. And these were their most beautiful dress, their most beautiful or prized piece. And that's what we have in the collection. But we love to have pieces that also are just what an everyday person would have worn, just to have that example to show. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of them out there. I mean, a lot of people, if you had one suit, you wore it till it was threadbare, and then you used the rags for something, to clean or something, and then you threw it away. So there just isn't that record, and it's a good point to make about them.
Yeah. So the other thing is, there are people that will kind of rehab pieces that are kind of far gone, like Rachel, who likes to finish unfinished projects.
Yeah.
And I was in a thrift store, the weirdest thrift store I had ever been in, several years ago. It was in California. And among all of this strange stuff, I found one 1940s piece, which I didn't even look at very closely. I pulled it off the rack and kind of checked out. And when I got home and took it and laid it out, I realized that it had a lot more issues than I had originally thought. So there's like sun fading on the shoulders. The whole hemline is just shredded, essentially. One thing I did discover was actually part of the Western costume house. So I guess it's a movie piece. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I have some plans. If the skirt is long enough, it's about mid-calf, that I could shorten it to right below my knee. And I'm going to try to dye it and see if it can still be, because it's a beautiful piece. It's got some really beautiful details. So I'm going to see if I can give it a second life.
Yeah, there is usually someone that will be interested in pieces like that for, study, to rehab, to learn, to practice techniques. When I did some textile training, we had at the school, there was a whole collection of pieces that had been donated to that school so that they could be used for practicing different techniques, which unfortunately around here, we don't necessarily have a place like that for textiles. We do have the Susquehanna Fashion Archives. That's probably the closest one to, or Shippensburg, sorry. Shippensburg Fashion Archives, which is probably the closest one to us, and they are a clothing collection. And they've taken some pieces from our collection, actually, some de-accession pieces that, you know, were in bad condition or something, but they wanted them because they maybe had a certain type of button or something that they could use. And they also sometimes will use buttons off of one piece to fill in missing ones on a historic piece that they have.
Yeah. And I think they are a teaching sort of institution as well, so they could probably use those pieces in other ways as well.
Or they'd know other people too that might want them. So.
So the other thing that can happen, especially for a quilt or for a clothing piece, is that somebody might even be able to take a pattern from it. Your garment or textile might live a second life by somebody drawing a pattern and then being able to recreate the garment, kind of like with the penny dress behind us. So that's another reason.
Yeah.
Don't throw it away.
That definitely happens in the quilt world. We actually, the History Center, we have a really great group that volunteers and works with our collection called QSI. And they have done a quilt documentation project since, I think, the early 90s is when they started. And they've documented a huge amount of quilts all across the county. And they're QSI because it's a play off of CSI. They're kind of doing like forensic work with them, where they're, you know, when you talk about holes, they love when there's a hole in the quilt because then they can look in and see, you know, what type of batting was used, and, you know, some details about the construction. Was it hand pieced or machine pieced? So we're really fortunate because they've done a lot of work with our collection, especially specifically with our quilt collection and documenting it. And they actually produced patterns that were, I think, and we have a book as well that I think we still have some copies of that in the gift shop, but they produced some patterns off of quilts that were in the collection. So that's an exact example of what you're mentioning.
Yeah, and these are all ways that we can preserve stories and preserve history. So don't throw it away.
Yeah, and there's a place for those sort of things. Maybe not every piece can be in a museum collection. You know, we are looking for pieces that fill gaps in our collecting. So if it's a time period, like for us with clothing right now, we have certain time periods that we don't have a lot of representation from, or we don't have that, like, different socioeconomic levels. So we might have a lot of 50s pieces, but they're, you know, the ball gown of someone, cocktail dress. Yeah, it's not their maybe everyday clothes. So definitely you can reach out to different museums if you have pieces that you're, you know, maybe interested in donating. A lot of local historical societies too, because people really, we know that our visitors really connect with clothing because it's something that all of us, you know, you wear from the time you're born. So we have, you know, people gravitate to textiles a lot in displays. So a lot of even smaller museums will like to have some clothing if they can.
And if it's an heirloom piece, if you know who wore it and for what occasion, always pass that information along. Collectors like to know, museums definitely want to know. The more information that we have about a piece, the more accurately we can date it. And then it becomes associated with a person. It has a story, which is the best part.
Yeah, we are really big on telling the people stories, not just the object. This is a such and such, you know, and the details of that object. But if we can tell something about the person that owned it, that's, you know, that's the ultimate, that's our goal, is to connect the people stories with the objects.
which kind of brings me back to the penny dress. I should call it Mrs. Gardner's dress. I spent a lot of time with her, and in one of the scenes, kind of, I think it's hidden between the lining and the fashion fabric in the bodice, is a little tag, and on the tag, written in, I think, ink, in a very like oldish kind of style handwriting, it says Mrs. Gardner. So it's Mrs. Gardner's penny dress, and I think by the wear on it, I think she really loved it.
Yeah. Well, do we want to look for some questions? I see some things popped up over there.
Yeah,
So
I think this is...
let's see.
Oh, that's Howard. So Howard Tendler is one of our wonderful education volunteers. And he has pointed out that dresses for teenage girls in the 18th century would have extra material in the back and the length of the dress. So adjustments can be made as they grow. So a lot of times you will see older garments for young women that have tucks sewn into the hem. Yep, it's to let the hem down so that you do not have to buy school clothes every year.
Yeah. Smart. Yeah. Very smart.
Do you want to check Facebook real quick?
Yeah, sure. Let me take my gloves off here so I can see if there's anything on Facebook. Oh, we got lots of good conversation. Hi, Samantha. Hi, Victoria. Hi, Christina. So Victoria says, fascinating. I need to go in there. Can I? I'll be masked. You can reach out to me. We do, bring people in. Not, this part is a closed off area, but if you reach out to me, we could probably work something out, show you some pieces you'd be interested in. Let's see. Waste out here when it comes to, yeah. How about, oh, that would be wonderful. Oh my gosh, Victoria, that would be really neat to see. Yeah.
Yes, we do want to see your traditional dress.
Yeah.
That is actually an area of costume and fashion study that is lacking a little bit. We talk a little bit. It's getting more and more, but there's a lot of focus on sort of European fashion. Everywhere had fashion. So yeah, we would love to see. I want to see it. Can I come?
Yeah, definitely. No, that would be great, Victoria. We would love to see that.
Okay. So is that?
I think that's all of our questions. Yeah. If you're interested in knowing anything else, or if you have any questions about specific pieces that are in your collections, please feel free to reach out to either of us. My email here is rwarner@yorkhistorycenter.net. Do you want to? .org. Sorry, .org. Yeah, .org. Yeah, we have another version, but .org is the best one to reach me at.
And mine is ccooper@yorkhistorycenter.org. Yeah, and I can maybe help you date some things, or if you have questions like that.
All right.
I don't think we have any more coming in.
Yeah.